Greetings and welcome in. This is Ask the Experts. Jim Dallas here along with Robert Seik from Partell Pharmacy. Go to partellpharmacy.com, get some more information. 702-791-3800. That's 702-791-3800 for Partell Pharmacy. partellpharmacy.com. Robert Seik, welcome back to KDWN.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be back.
Tell you what, we learned a lot last week, and of course, you don't know what you don't know. So that's why we encourage you to hang around for the better part of the next hour and live and learn. And, of course, you could live a healthier life. Now, Robert, we talked about using the show to get people in that healthier mode. And I know that hormone replacement therapy, it's a big part of what Partell Pharmacy offers. So that's the first thing people should look at to improve their health right away. Is that right?
Well, Jim, I'm glad you asked that question because of my profession and what I do now, and even with people my age, I'm about to turn 43, they just say, oh, well, I want to get my hormones in order. That is my anti-aging protocol. And I say, well, stop right there. Because the first thing I want you to know is that hormones are not enough and not necessarily the best starting place as far as the hormone replacement therapy that we make in our compounding facility at the two pharmacies. And what I talk about is, there's many ways to consider hormone management, and a lot of what people hear about is testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. But really, there's a more basic starting point. The foundation, as we've heard many, many times, we've heard it from grandma, we've heard it from numerous books, the foundation is a healthy, nutrient-dense diet. And that's really the first place to start. And there's going to be two hormones I talk about. We'll get to them, and we're going to talk about insulin and cortisol. These are the first two hormones I really tell people that you have to be concerned about before we even discuss the fun ones, the testosterone, the things we hear advertised, which are very important too.
Right.
I'm going to get to that. But hormones are not enough. You have to have a foundation that is a healthy diet. And people say, well, what is that? And they show me the old traditional U.S. food pyramid. And I say, it's time to turn that upside down.
Yeah, I think we're all familiar with that one where you're supposed to have, so much dairy, so much meat, fruits and vegetables, and it goes on down the line. Like you say, it's a food pyramid. It's a guideline.
Right. And what's the bottom of that pyramid? It's your grains and your cereals. That's what the U.S. Department of Agriculture at least used to say you should consume in the greatest quantity. Well, the thing is, there's a lot of economics about food. The sad fact is carbohydrates are cheap. They're easy to store. They're easy to transport. And by carbohydrates, things made from grains, a lot of starches. And you look at the bottom of the pyramid and you think, well, this is where the breads, the cereals, the pastas are coming from. And, they're inexpensive, the most profitable food items to sell, the most profitable food items to be in restaurants, whereas vegetables, and that's what we should really have, in my opinion, to the bottom of the pyramid.
Right.
They're much more costly, but much more nutrient dense. So when I show presentations to the public and also to medical practitioners, I have a slide that shows the U.S. Department of Agriculture data that the average American consumes 100 pounds of sugar per year and 150 pounds of flour.
That is a lot. But when you do break it down, it does make sense. 12 months in a year, 365 days, 100 pounds.
Right.
Wow.
And here's the thing. People ask me, well, how does this all relate to hormones? I say, well, let me break it down very simply. When we consume these simple forms of carbohydrates, and carbohydrates from grains is nothing more than a longer sugar. Okay, our body breaks them down, uses them for energy, but we consume so much, too much, according to many medical experts out there, that we have this abundance of energy that we have to store somewhere else if we don't burn it. Well, what do we know is the body's primary storage mechanism for excess energy? We store excess energy as fat. Right? So, very simply put, we go from one meal that's very dense in these carbohydrates, these sugars and these starches. We go from one meal or snack to the next because these are the things that we've either become conditioned to eat or promoted by the food pyramid, well, whatever. Something is driving that 100 and 150 pound statistic for the sugars and the grains respectively, right? So we eat a lot of those, and what's happening in our body is your blood glucose level A lot of people are familiar with that, especially they're getting older or they're diabetic or been told they're pre-diabetic. They're looking at their blood sugar level. These are the foods that elevate blood sugar. And you can elevate blood sugar rapidly and very high. You can also elevate blood sugar high for a very long time. And we call that something a glycemic load. Lots of sugar, a long time. That's a high glycemic load diet that is driven by these foods. And this has some hormonal consequences. And what we notice the most, what we feel and see, is the weight gain from all of this.
Right. Usually it's in the gut area for some reason. I don't know whether that's lack of exercise or that's just where it goes.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up because where we put fat are how practitioners who are adjusting the fine points in hormone therapy actually evaluate. There is a tool that we actually use a little bit at the pharmacy where we assess the body's fat levels at different points. It's a little ultrasound tool. So it's not just around the waist. We typically look at the largest portion of the waist, the hips, you've got also the arms. And if somebody preferentially deposits fat around their belly, that tells us one story. But if they don't have a lot of fat around their belly, but they're putting it in their arms and thighs, that tells us a different hormonal story. But it's interesting you brought up the belly fat because one of the hormones that I mentioned we're going to talk about is insulin. The other is cortisol. When we elevate our blood sugar level with these high carbohydrate, high glycemic foods, insulin goes up and it stays up for a long time. It's like a hot air balloon, not a stone. If we throw a stone up in the air, it comes down rapidly.
Right.
We put insulin up like a hot air balloon. It stays up for a long time. And while its level is very high in the body, a number of things are happening. Insulin is basically putting away the excess energy. We can only store so much of it in our livers. We can only store so much of it in our muscles. And the rest gets dumped into what could potentially be an endless void of fat. Now, you're going to talk about cortisol. How do these interplay? Well, I think we mentioned in the previous show that we live in a stressed society. We live in work in 21st century America. We've all worked hard for a living. We're stimulated all day long with, our laptop screens, the iPads, the cell phones. Sometimes we're on both of these things at the same time. We're listening to the news bark at us in the evening and we're watching TV before bed. A stress hormone called cortisol, which should only be released in bursts, go up high and go back down, we keep elevated all the time. And here's the bad news when it comes to insulin and blood sugar. These two feed off of each other. Cortisol makes insulin more potent. And how do I know? In terms of how someone deposits fat, that their cortisol is high. High cortisol, high stress prefers to deposit fat around the belly.
It goes there automatically. Actually, you're describing why it goes there. Because a lot of people, they just can't get rid of that gut. Once you get to whether it's a certain age or maybe a lifestyle, maybe you're not walking a mile a day. Maybe that would cut down on that.
You're absolutely right about all of those. And then when it comes to hormones, people say, well, it's thyroid that's related to weight loss. Well, it's only insulin. Well, it's testosterone. Yes, to it's all of those things.
All of them.
And you mentioned early in our cycle of having this show of what could be some of the fine points of, how do we choose what the best intervention is for a client, a patient. And I kind of wanted the theme for this show, and everyone can remember this who's listening, one thing, because we talk about a lot of information. And when the hour's over, I'm sure there's listeners that go, wow, I don't really know where to start.
Right. So a lot of information. Boom.
Right.
Try to catch it as it sails over.
So one thing is this week's promotional code at the pharmacy. So that's good for 20% off of supplements. We're going to talk about a couple today that might help with the insulin, blood sugar, and cortisol. We also have a juice bar called the Green Regime that is at our Eastern Pharmacy at Russell. Right. And you can use that discount code at either place.
I like that. If you just tuned in, you're listening to Ask the Experts here at AM 720 KDWN. Robert Seik is here from Partell Pharmacy. Check him out, partellpharmacy.com, 702-791-3800, the phone number. 2 locations in town here, 8751 West Charleston, also 5835 Southeastern. That's Partell's Pharmacy. Go to partellpharmacy.com. So when you're talking about the hormones, Robert, in the insulin, you're saying that's why people are getting the pot belly.
It's the insulin and the cortisol interplay. And specifically, in a general way, I've listened to practitioners in this field, whether you call it anti-aging medicine or functional medicine or integrative medicine, where you have to integrate diet with standard medicine, because people with poor blood sugar control are going to need prescribed medicine, most likely. They integrate the concepts, and it's one of the visual things, this deposition of belly fat or abdominal fat, that might say, aha, I think we should check your cortisol level. And doctors, they commonly will order, if they're functional medicine practitioners, they'll order an AM cortisol. What's your cortisol level in the morning? And I still spend a lot of my day. I collaborate with physicians. I view the pharmacist's training as being a treatment consultant. And if I have a physician new to this type of medicine that will say to me, okay, you're a pharmacist, you're experienced in this business, you're familiar with the things that we can use to adjust hormone levels, and I think I have a patient with high cortisol, I'm going to order the morning cortisol. It's done by blood draw, usually between 7 and 9 a.m. Okay.
Interesting.
And, you'll look at the lab value that comes back, and someone will say, well, what is the ideal range that I should be in? Because the normal range is a big bell curve. It might not necessarily be always ideal. And our cortisol is usually highest in the morning, and we want it to be. Cortisol typically follows the rhythm of the sun. Sun is up, gets us out of bed. We jump out of bed, cortisol gets us moving, and cortisol slowly goes down throughout the day. It's the chronic elevation of cortisol that's bad. So if I look at a lab sheet and I see that cortisol number between 10 and 15, that's good. Some practitioners even order salivary cortisol. I'm sure listeners will say, well, I've spit into a tube 4 times throughout a day to look at that cortisol rhythm. And hey, that's great too. Not everybody really has access to that, or the time for it, or the insurance coverage for it. I get a lot of answers by looking at the morning cortisol.
Interesting.
And here's how it plays into my recommendations with regard to what we talked about: insulin, blood sugar, and fat. One thing. What one thing could listeners do if they listen to nothing else in the show to say, okay, I get it. Lots of carbohydrates, lots of starches, not going to take them all out of my diet just yet. I want to see if this works. What can I do? I get the picture. Okay, most Americans tell me when I ask them, what do you eat for breakfast? They say, well, cereal or toast, bread, bagels. They eat something very dense in carbohydrates. And when is our cortisol level the highest? In the morning. When is the worst time to have these foods high in carbohydrate density with the grains and sugar? It's in the morning, because cortisol is going to amplify what insulin does, and that's the worst time to have those foods, because that's when it's going to go straight to the belly.
We're going to talk about that more in just a few minutes. Robert Seik is here from Partell Pharmacy. 2 locations here in Southern Nevada: 8751 West Charleston, 5835 Southeastern. PartellPharmacy.com, 702-791-3800. We'll take our first time out. You're listening to Ask the Experts here on AM 720 KDWN. All right, welcome back. It is Ask the Experts here at AM 720 KDWN. Jim Dallas here, along with Robert Seik from Partell Specialty Pharmacy. Check them out, PartellPharmacy.com. Also, 702-791-3800 is the phone number, 702-791-3800 for Partell Pharmacy. Now, before the break, Robert, we were talking about breakfast, and I just wanted to ask you from my personal viewpoint here. I know that there has been a time where I've eaten a lot of cereal in the morning, and I'm kind of wondering, pancakes, cereal, that sort of thing, is that a good way to start the day nutrition-wise? Well,
that's what we were led to believe, and that's consistent with the food pyramid, right? But the overwhelming amount of medical evidence is now showing, and this is stuff that's being published, is that the higher the density of carbohydrates in the diet, the more that we're going to have weight gain and a number of other consequences. Weight gain we can see and feel, but now we're talking about blood pressure and diabetes, or at least pre-diabetes. And, you mentioned the cereals. Well, that's the consistent part of the theme. And we were talking before the break about the one thing. And people say to me, well, this is all very daunting to me. I don't know if I can make this big dietary change. And we said, what if you can do one thing? And people say, well, I don't know what to switch my breakfast to. One of the reasons we put the Green Regime juice bar in the pharmacy was so that I could have my folks behind the counter sample out protein shakes that we mix up. It's part of the menu. And when I have people typically substitute out their typical breakfast, which may have used to have been that bowl of cereal you talked about, Jim, or the bagels, or the pancakes, or that very, dense carbohydrate, high sugar cereal, for the protein shake, particularly one that's low in carbohydrates, high in protein, people started to lose weight just by doing that one thing. This week's promotional code. So even at the juice bar, use the one thing promotional code, try it out. And our health coaches, our staff behind the juice bar, they're happy to teach people how to make their own protein smoothie recipes at home, because we do have the good high quality protein powders. And if that's all listeners get out of the show, okay, I'm going to change out my high carbohydrate breakfast for a protein shake even 5 days a week. I've typically seen 5 to 8 pounds of weight loss in the first month just by that one change.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, I think on a previous show we talked about whey protein, and that's more of a bulk type protein, isn't it, if you want to build muscle?
Well, whey protein is preferred by bodybuilders. It's very high in an amino acid called leucine. It's very efficient at building muscle. And here's my take on it. Whey protein is great. It is the best bang for your buck protein out there. But not everybody can tolerate whey protein very well. And some people say, well, I don't break out in a skin rash. Well, that's not the only sign of a mild intolerance. Gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, the clearing of the throat because you have postnasal drip, those are all signs of mild intolerance. So if you do have those mild intolerances to whey, we recommend commonly a product we sell. It's called Total Vegan. It is a 5-plant source protein. I'm sensitive to whey, so I use the vegan protein. It's a combination of rice, yellow pea, cranberry, hemp protein, and chia seed protein. It's got a very balanced amino acid spectrum because it uses all 5 plants. But either way, if you can tolerate the whey protein, use it. It's always the best bang for your buck.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I've heard good things about it. You can get it across the counter. So, that is very good for you. Now, Robert, I understand that obviously the foundation for good health is a good diet, but for me and my listeners, can you explain the basics of the 2 hormones that you mentioned, insulin and cortisol?
Well, those 2 things, insulin is basically your energy storage hormone. So what we want to do is keep insulin as low as possible all the time, because we don't want to overstore the energy and really what's happening is we could store too much fat. What cortisol does is amplify insulin's kind of ability to hang around. Insulin can stay around for a long time. And then when you add fuel to the fire, which is starches and sugars, now you have all 3 of these things, the sugar and then the 2 hormones elevated. So we really want to keep these in check. And it's often the first intervention in functional medicine is to look at what we call this triad. So let's break out functional medicine. We'll talk about all 5 triads in future shows, but your adrenal glands, your thyroid, and your pancreas. That's where insulin is made, is in the pancreas. That's your energy triad. So a lot of questions I get as well. We talked about this earlier. Can I just start with hormones like testosterone and that's my protocol to get healthier? That's actually triad number 5, almost step 5 in my opinion. Not necessarily for everyone, but triad number 1, get the carbs down, get insulin and cortisol down, blood sugar down, and you're off to a great start.
Now, they say, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that high cortisol and high testosterone can't coexist together.
And that's true. So that's where we start to get some overlap. Again, just because I'm a guy and I'm a male that owns a pharmacy that happens to be a compounding pharmacy, and when I meet people or even my friends that are my age now and their testosterone, they might want to get a check, and they ask me, I say, well, I think it's time for me to get on testosterone therapy. And I notice, okay, they got that layer of belly fat, and then they tell me what they eat during the day and then how they live, and say, well, I'm running my home business at night after I come home from work, and then I play video games with these violent fighting video games at night before. Hey, your cortisol's up all day long.
Right.
I'm not going to give you testosterone because maybe the reason, especially for younger men, under 40 especially, maybe even under 50, they are probably candidates for testosterone therapy. But what I want to try to do is help them get their cortisol down first, and see if their testosterone goes back up. The two hormones cannot coexist at a high level. High stress lowers testosterone, simply put. And the body can't make every hormone all the time. And if you're in a stress situation, so let's imagine real stress that ancient man faced was being chased and potentially eaten by a lion.
Right.
That's when cortisol shot up through the roof, right?
I would imagine, yeah.
You either got away and went right back to relaxing, or you didn't get away, which it didn't matter where
Right.
your cortisol was. The way we live in 21st century America, cortisol can be elevated all the time. And there's actually a couple of very effective herbs that have been studied. There's one combination of herbs called Relora. It's actually in a product that we sell called Bliss. For high cortisol folks, that's the first thing we use. It is a supplement we buy from a company ironically called Compounded Nutrients. Same philosophy we have in the compounding lab, make the best stuff to high quality standards. These herb combinations are very useful at lowering cortisol. But you might have heard these other strategies too to reduce stress. Simple things as 5 minutes of meditation a day. If you get 8, even better. A great book, 8-minute meditation. You don't have to sit like a monk for an hour. Can you just relax without stimulation for 8 minutes? Proven effective, and it's free. That will lower your stress hormone, cortisol.
You know, I've heard that. I've never tried that before, but, you know, it sounds easier than it probably is, because to sit and just, think for 5 minutes, that's got to be a difficult thing to do.
You know, I think so too. And, one of the daunting things about this is, people say, well, I've heard that yoga is great for lowering stress. Oh,
I've heard that.
It's magnificent. Absolutely. But not everyone can make it to a yoga class every day.
Good point.
In the time it can take you to drive to a place, if you can just shut off all stimuli and chill out for 8 minutes, I'll settle for 5, cortisol will start coming down. And there's other things that you can do too. Simple, very simple, and free. Before you consume a meal, have you ever seen people, Jim, on lunch break? They're busy, they're working. They don't really chew their food. They inhale it. They eat really fast.
Yeah. 3 bites, boom, it's down.
Take 3 to 5 deep breaths before starting the meal. That's it. Nobody will notice that you're doing it. The food's in front of you just a little bit longer. You'll eat slower. You'll chew more. Your cortisol level will go down. Both of those things are free. There's a type of tea called holy basil tea. The holy basil herb, very effective at lowering cortisol. Well, now you're into something that you can buy, but I like to recommend the holy basil tea specifically before the capsule that you can also get too, because the tea is kind of like a ritual. Heat up the water, you have the tea. That's kind of like a relaxing ritual. And then, we've probably read and all seen a number of articles on good things like good sleep hygiene. Let's relax before bed. Let's get the television away an hour before we want to fall asleep and maybe read a book, but not on the electronic glaring e-readers today, right?
Right.
Let's get a good old-fashioned page or the Kindle Paperwhite, which mimics that. These are all things that lower cortisol, and they're all either free or cheap.
I like that. The price is right on those, definitely. So if you just tuned in, it is Ask the Experts here at AM 720 KDWN. Robert Seik is here from Partell Specialty Pharmacy, partellpharmacy.com. Check them out. 702-791-3800 is the phone number. 2 locations here in Southern Nevada, 8751 West Charleston, 5835 Southeastern, partellpharmacy.com. Again, 702-791-3800. All right, welcome back. It is Ask the Experts here at AM 720 KDWN. Robert Seik is along with me tonight from Partell Specialty Pharmacy. 2 locations here in Southern Nevada, 8751 West Charleston and 5835 Southeastern, partellpharmacy.com. Also, the phone number 702-791-3800. Now, Robert, at the beginning of the show, we talked about the intake of all the bad things that people do throughout the course of a year, like 100 pounds of flour and 150 pounds of sugar, along those lines. That is just at a level that I can't imagine that I myself take in, but you got to figure. It does work out that way. I think people are looking for that low glycemic diet, and I'm wondering, how can you achieve that and still not walk around hungry all the time?
You're right. And, you hit it on the head. It's the carbohydrates, starches, sugars that are driving up insulin that we talked about, a big contributing factor to weight gain, and we just eat too much. And the low glycemic diet is really the way to go. I get a lot of questions about this. What diet do you recommend? Well, I don't really like the term diet. Let's just say way of living, way of life for eating. And there's no one specific diet that I always recommend, but a low glycemic diet is known by many names, and you may have heard some of these, such as the Mediterranean diet, the Zone diet, the Paleo diet, the Primal Blueprint diet. The basic gist I want listeners to know is get the high glycemic carbohydrates out of the diet. Your health will improve. We also talked about, getting more nutrient-dense foods into the diet. Well, when we trade out those carbohydrates, we're going to be adding in vegetables, and these are bulking. So there are two things that primarily inhibit appetite. One, the fullness that we feel. You can almost eat a punch bowl's worth of dark green leafy vegetables per day. That has very few calories, but it's going to make you full, right?
Right.
It's a lot of vegetables. I mean, I eat as many vegetables as I can, even the dark green leafies. Really, I juice some of them. That's why we use the juicing recipes, because I know I want to get them in. Honestly, Jim, I don't have that much time to chew.
Right.
But I do try to get a big salad as often as I can and actually chew the food, okay? The other thing that inhibits appetite, one of the primary things that we can eat, are healthy fats. When we went fat-free, which I think was in the 80s, America still gained weight and gained it rapidly because we said, well, let's go all fat-free foods. Nope, that wasn't the answer. Our brains were still craving because fat sends a signal to the brain, as does fullness. Both signals take about 15 to 20 minutes to travel. So think about eating fast versus eating slow, right?
Right.
But if you get a little bit hungry, and I think we talked about this in the last show, during the last show, where do you get healthy fats as a snack? You know what? Nuts are a great healthy fat snack.
I was just going to say, I have gone out. In fact, I've got some in my pocket right now. And let me show Robert, because ever since the show that we did, now these are honey roasted. Are these good?
Well, the honey's going to give you some sugar that I would, it's a step in the right direction, Jim, for sure. Without the honey coating, it might be a little bit better, but hey, you made a change, and isn't that the goal of the shows? We get people to make small changes, that one thing change. I mean, you can easily overdo it on nuts. You showed me a small package that would fit in the palm of your hand. That's a typical serving. We don't want to eat a big bowl because they are calorie dense, so we can overdo it quickly. Other things, something I put on my salad, chia seeds. I like to use olive oil at room temperature rather than cook with it because olive oil is a healthy fat, and that healthy fat will inhibit appetite. A lot of people are learning ways to use something like organic virgin coconut oil, a great healthy fat, also a good cooking oil because it has a high heat, high smoke index. So healthy fats will help inhibit appetite in addition to the bulking. So let's look at a new, say, functional medicine food pyramid. At the bottom, as many vegetables as you think you can eat. And then let's look at lean quality sources of protein are going to be ideal. Maybe not every vegetarian or vegan out there is going to adopt for the animal-based proteins. And of course, always the organic, the free range, the no antibiotics, those are always better. And we know that. And at the very top of the pyramid, we're going to have healthy fats. And you know what? Let's not say that's the next to the top level, because I'm still a person that I don't eat perfectly because, hey, I like dark chocolate. I like dark chocolate with sea salt. I like pizza. And I'll go out and I'll have a slice of pizza every now and then. I don't have 4, and I don't have it 3 or 4 nights a week. But I keep it under control and still do some living by adjusting the food pyramid. It's just that dough from the pizza, well, that doesn't make up the bottom of my personal food pyramid as the number one type of food that I consume, these grains, starches, cereals, and sugars.
Right. Now, they say fish is good. That is a great source of protein, right?
Absolutely.
And there's not too many negatives associated with that. It's even good for the heart.
That's true. I mean, you always have to look at the source, too, right? Because, and more people are becoming aware of, the source of the fish. Is it actually wild-caught Alaskan salmon, or is it farm-raised salmon? And that animal is only as healthy as what that animal ate. I think it's very apparent now. It's talked about what are the differences in health in terms of commercially raised beef in what we call the concentrated animal feeding operations, the CAFOs, where they're fed on lots of grains. What do you think these cows have? These cows have diabetes. And we can, because they're eating grains. Their natural food is grass. Grass-fed beef has a totally different nutritional makeup. So there's something called the Agricultural Nutrient Density Index. And grass-fed beef, I think, is very high on the list, somewhere in the top 3. But commercially raised beef doesn't even make the top 20.
Interesting. Well, you always hear advertising along the lines that this beef is corn-fed, and that supposedly it brings a positive connotation when you're talking about corn-fed beef. Is that more rumor than truth?
I think what we are generally very good at in the United States is marketing. And, I see the billboards here too, and I'm not going to lie, I tell you, they appeal to me because you see a nice, juicy porterhouse or prime rib that's advertised, looks great.
Yeah.
Well, one thing you don't see is you don't see the broccoli advertised. Hey, come in for our great fresh broccoli this week.
It's true.
Okay, it doesn't appeal to people, right?
Right.
And the advertising the corn-fed beef. Well, actually, I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania. We raised beef. Okay, and the corn-fed beef. Now, first of all, corn is one of the agricultural crops we subsidize in the United States. We've got to do something with it.
Right.
And cows that eat a lot of corn, they grow fast, rapidly, and there's a lot of fat in the meat. You're basically eating what we would call an insulin-resistant diabetic or pre-diabetic cow. The extra fats in that meat does give it more flavors. And it's not that I never have corn-fed beef. There's some great restaurants here that serve it. But for my home, for example, I found grass-fed beef resources in Utah I used for a while. There's actually a group called Alpine. I don't know if it's the Alpine Beef Company or whatever, but it's Alpine, and they're actually using grass-fed cows from the northern part of our state, the Reno, Tahoe area. I buy in bulk. I buy at the home because I personally can't afford the price of grass-fed beef in some of our grocery stores here.
Right.
But, it's available. And it's a small point because people say, well, okay, if I get the cheap foods out of the diet, which you said early, carbs are cheap, and I want to put the vegetables in, wow, this all gets really expensive. I used to think that way too, Jim. I had a slide in my presentation that showed the McDonald's Golden Arches. And it was a truth in advertising slide. At the bottom, it read, because you only have $5.
Yeah.
Well, I was correct.
That's where you go.
I was corrected by a good friend of mine, a physician and mentor who is in this field, and he said, Robert, I'm going to correct that slide for you. He says, I worked with a colleague of mine who happened to be a professional chef, and we were able to feed a family of 3 a low glycemic diet every day of the week, and it was cheaper than McDonald's. And I said, I don't get it. How did you do that? He says, you have to buy in bulk. He said, that's what these warehouse stores are for, particularly Costco is moving to a place where they have more and more higher quality food items. And if you bought in bulk, now you might not always be buying New York strip. You're getting a lot of sirloin as your cut of beef, right?
Right.
You might not always be buying chicken breasts. You're buying, the thighs. And you're not always buying the absolute best cuts, but they were able to do it. And they did it for a month and built a recipe plan around it. I was astounded. And I took the slide out. And I just said, I stand corrected. And now I know that it can be done cheaply because, I'm interested in saving as much money as I can, at the same time also eating as healthy as I can. And that's one of the strategies I employed.
I know when you're talking about, let's say, chicken McNuggets, since you brought up McDonald's, and we're not picking on them, we're just generally talking here. But when you eat a chicken nugget, you go, well, it tastes like white meat. I guess it is white meat. But there's no actual nugget that is in a chicken. So it kind of makes you wonder, where is that meat coming from?
I don't know, and I'm not an investigator or an expert in the food manufacturing business, but the nugget is a manufactured item.
Right.
And just 4 hours ago, before I came into the studio, there was an article actually posted on AOL about what the mystery ingredients are in a chicken McNugget. So if listeners really want to know, without us telling them, Jim, what's in those things, there are plenty of resources online to find out.
Oh, okay. I was going to say ignorance is bliss in something like that.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news all the time. And, some people say, well, what am I going to feed my kids? There are healthier options. And I'm, very aware that life in 21st century America is busy, particularly for parents. I'm a parent. I couldn't even imagine a single parent that's also working and say, that sometimes all we have is time to go through the drive-through and,
Right.
you eat what you can when you can.
Right.
And, so I try to think about that and say, well, protein shakes are great. My kid gets a protein shake every morning because that's what I make myself for breakfast before I take my 4-year-old off to school. Okay, and he gets a protein shake, loves it. And here's the secret. He wants a treat after dinner. I take the same protein shake mix and I pour into popsicle molds.
Nice.
That's his healthy treat.
That is good. That's a great trick, and it's healthy, and he doesn't know the difference.
He thinks it's great.
Yeah.
It's chocolate. We use the chocolate total vegan, or he can tolerate very well the chocolate whey protein.
Right.
That we call slim fit whey. We have that as well. And, I encourage listeners, so the one thing you can use at our juice bar, the Green Regime, you can try out one of the protein shakes. Our people behind the juice bar, our health coaches, they will share freely with you our recipes. You can make this stuff at home. You don't have to come to the pharmacy every day to get your protein shake, and they'll just sample it for you if you want it right there. Have them mix it up.
It's great information. And, of course, it's PartellPharmacy.com. Check them out, 702-791-3800. 2 locations here in Southern Nevada, 8751 West Charleston, 5835 Southeastern. PartellPharmacy.com. Again, 702-791-3800. We'll take our final time out and continue. You're listening to Ask the Experts here on AM 720 KDWN. All right, welcome back. It is Ask the Experts here on AM 720 KDWN. Just a few minutes left in the show. Jim Dallas here along with Robert Seik from Partell Specialty Pharmacy. Go to PartellPharmacy.com. Also, 702-791-3800 is the phone number, 702-791-3800. And I tell you what, we always learn a lot when you're here, Robert. And of course, throughout the course of today's show, we've been talking a lot about insulin and blood sugar. And I'm just wondering if when you're talking about those two ingredients, does testosterone play a role in any part of that?
Well, thanks, Jim. I know that when we started this show, we understood that listeners are going to want to know about the main things we do at compounding pharmacies, making the hormones, and testosterone is advertised on radio shows and various other commercials. It is a big component of what we do. And the answer to your question is, yes, testosterone has a huge impact on things like blood sugar and insulin. And here's why. If you have a low testosterone patient, and this is men and women, it'll be a whole different show to let everybody know that testosterone is 10 times more abundant in the female body than estrogen, and that is a misconception. We'll talk about that.
That is total.
So, men and women both need testosterone, and when you have a low testosterone patient who has poor blood sugar control, they are likely to have poor blood sugar control. What we can say from the medical literature is that low testosterone and loss of blood sugar control are linked. They are associated. If we take testosterone levels back to the healthy high levels, I would consider that the upper 25% of what the normal range is for both men and women, we see on average a typical 20% drop in blood sugar. 20% drop. So one of the things we mentioned was, okay, the cortisol lab and what the values are. Not everyone has gotten a cortisol lab drawn, but almost everyone who has checked up on their health, they look at what we call the comprehensive metabolic panel, and that will include something called the fasting glucose level. That's your blood sugar. And most of the time, people will look at it and see a level that's 100 or less and say, well, I'm doing okay. My fasting blood sugar is okay. Diabetes isn't a worry for me. Well, here's something to consider, and think about that 20% drop. You're a low testosterone male patient. You come back with a blood sugar level of 100 and you think you're okay. And we know if we put the testosterone on board, you might get that 20% drop. You go down to 80. Well, is that meaningful? I like to point to things that are not my opinion. I like to point to things that I define as what the preponderance of medical evidence shows. So a small study, about 48,000 patients, just under actually, small, over a short period of time, 20 years, I'm being sarcastic, at Kaiser, pretty big health group, right?
Yeah, I would say.
What they showed, for every single point your fasting blood sugar is above 84, you have a 6% chance of developing diabetes, and the risk is cumulative. So at 85, 1 point above 84, you have a 6% chance. At 94, 10 points above 84, you have a 60% chance of developing diabetes in your lifetime. So you see where maybe we shouldn't just be so ho-hum and kind of dismiss that blood sugar at 100 or 98 or 99. We have to think about that good glycemic control. Remember, we talked about the first foundation.
Right.
The healthy diet. Let's turn that food pyramid upside down. Get rid of the starches, or at least dramatically reduce them, and put a lot more vegetables in. And then testosterone, you asked if it plays a role. Well, absolutely. Men are pretty familiar nowadays with what testosterone makes them feel. Better strength, better energy, more clear mind. They're more decisive. Their libido is better.
Right.
You know what? Women, same thing too. The things we don't feel from testosterone, and this applies to both genders, is that testosterone helps us maintain or even build bone mass. Building muscle mass, well, that's obvious. Testosterone will help us build muscle mass. It will help keep the skin thick. And yes, to your point about blood sugar and insulin, it will lower blood sugar. And if your blood sugar is lower, your insulin is going to be lower. Well, insulin is driving inflammation, so the lower I have my insulin, the better. I'm not going to be so inflamed. One of those mechanisms by which we age, right? And testosterone is its own natural anti-inflammatory. So we get a double positive effect. And you know what, Jim, I'm glad you brought it up, and we're going to wrap the show up with it. Whatever other questions you have, we can answer before the time's over. But testosterone is going to be a common topic that I want people to call in and ask about when we actually feature it on future shows. Ask the experts.
Yeah, and certainly. And by the way, if you did just tune in, we're speaking with Robert Seik of Partell Specialty Pharmacy. Go to partellpharmacy.com. You can get a lot of information there. Also, 702-791-3800. 2 locations here in Southern Nevada, 8751 West Charleston, also 5835 Southeastern, partellpharmacy.com. But when you're talking about the testosterone and everything, I think it's a misconception that women don't have a lot of it.
Well, it is a common misconception. And again, I look at lab reports, okay? Estrogen in women is typically measured in something called a picogram. That is 12 decimal points, 12 places away from 0.0. That's a picogram. Testosterone is measured in nanograms. It's only 9 decimal points away, so 3 zeros. Sometimes people, when they come in and they ask about their lab reports, and we don't do any diagnosis at the pharmacy, but sometimes we'll give a consultation, and I even do a lot of advising to physicians who call me from around the country and say, well, what do you think about the labs and the patient's symptoms? And when I say, well, look at this woman's testosterone levels. Well, it's a testosterone level in a woman. Isn't estrogen far more important? And I'll say this, in a woman, estrogen has 400 different functions. But at any time during a healthy female's life, at any time, her testosterone level should be 10 times higher than her estrogen level. 10 times higher. You find an abundance of articles. And I have a website that is separate. I have an information website that I run for medical practitioners and patients on testosterone replacement therapy, specifically using what are called subcutaneous pellet implants. A technology has been around since 1938, okay? Old technology, it is still the best. It's revitapel.com, revitapel.com, and there is a link there, this tab called the data section. And I tell physicians and even listeners, click on the data section. And there's a number of medical articles. They're password protected. You don't have to pay for this, but it's just the rules when you have medical articles on a website. You have to have a username and password.
Right.
The username is the word data. The password is the word data. And all I want is for women to look at all the articles on testosterone and women's health, and you will just look at the titles. Testosterone in women and bone density. It improves bone density. Testosterone and cardiovascular health. And these ones will be subjects all their own. Women with low testosterone are at greater risk of developing breast cancer than women with high testosterone.
Interesting.
And so all of these things play, and yes, so the bottom line is women need to have their testosterone checked and have a conversation with their practitioner about their hormones and make sure that testosterone is part of that conversation.
We're speaking with Robert Seik of Partell Pharmacy. Check him out, partellpharmacy.com. And I'm wondering, is it true, Robert, that as people age, women, they increase in testosterone as they age, and men increase estrogen. Is that true, or is it just some wives' tale?
Well, the second part is generally true. Okay, women, their hormones are going down, and they typically go down, steadily over a period of time. And when women actually feel menopause around 50, that's when the rug is essentially pulled out from under them, and they have a rapid decline in their estrogen. Hot flashes and night sweats are pretty severe, and they feel that.
Right.
The testosterone decline is slower and longer in a woman's life, so she may not necessarily feel that. For a man, we lose anywhere from 1 to 5% of our testosterone per year from age 35 on, so we don't really feel the slow decline. So I do encourage people to recognize some of the symptoms, and I don't know if that answered your question, Jim, or if there's a couple things you want me to finish up on.
Well, it did, because I've always heard that as people age, women, for instance, they take on more male characteristics, and with men, they take on more female characteristics as they age.
Oh, well, I see where you're going with that, and I forgot to answer the second part of the question. There's a book by a physician named Eugene Shippen. The book is called Testosterone Syndrome, Chapter 5. I have referred hundreds of patients and medical practitioners to that chapter. Chapter 5 is titled Estrogen, the Culprit. Exactly what you said. Does estrogen go up in men as they age? Yes, it does. Testosterone goes down. Estrogen goes up. Right. Let's go back to the labs. We want testosterone in men. Let's say, rough number, let's pick 1,000. That's healthy. Let's pick estrogen 10 to 20. So at 20, that's a 50-to-1 ratio. If estrogen goes up and testosterone goes down, or both happen at the same time, that's bad news.
Do yourself a favor. Go to PartellPharmacy.com. Check them out. 702-791-3800 is that phone number. 2 locations here on both sides of town here in Southern Nevada. 8751 West Charleston, also 5835.